Chris Chang video.
A man of such skill as an innovator that the rules of logic tremble before him, Casey Leander. I present to you the man with the arm of a rocket, with an intelligence that defies explanation, one of the best historians in these United States of America, Mr. Wilson Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to begin by saying that I know some of you may have been personally harmed by the Brotherhood in the past. You may have been soaked with a water balloon, yelled at during dinner, or had your bike zip tied to a tree. But tonight, we're not here to talk about those instances. Tonight, we are here because Casey and I believe in the reconciling and restoring power of the discipline of history. You see, we are not here to promote on you the dogma that the Brotherhood is the best floor on campus. I mean, both Casey and I would subscribe to that, but we also acknowledge the need for diversity in a resident's life, even if that diversity exists on a much less awesome level than what is found on the Brotherhood. We believe, that once you understand where we are coming from on the Brotherhood, from a historical standpoint, you will be able to tolerate some of our crazy antics a little bit more, and might even come to appreciate some of them. So we hope that tonight, a night that makes you laugh, a night that makes you cry, but most importantly, a night that will bring about a spirit of healing and mutual understanding between the third floor of Samuel Morris and the rest of campus. So we want to extend a hand down to where you are and bring you up to our level so that you can experience the view from the top of Residence Culture at Taylor. And without further ado, Casey Leander will begin the history of the Brotherhood.
All right, well, Wilson basically said it. We did a J-term independent study in history. We literally got 2 history credits for this on the history of the 3rd floor of Samuel Morris Hall. And we discovered more than we ever thought we would. I think we and a lot of people initially thought we were just going to slack off. And while there was plenty of that, we also discovered a very rich history that goes all the way back to 1958 and the creation of this brand new Samuel Morris Residence Hall. So we're going to walk you through the history of the Brotherhood and each of its 3 phases, which we have called, number 1, the inception phase of the Brotherhood, the creation. Number 2, the articulation phase of the Brotherhood, where they started to recognize themselves as a Brotherhood. And the 3rd phase is the continuation phase, where we find ourselves today. So, Wilson, hit us up with some of that inception phase.
Yes. Well, we begin in 1958 with the building of the brand new Samuel Morris dorm. Really, we begin before that with Dr. Milo Rediger. And Dr. Milo Rediger brought to this Taylor University, he was a dean of students and later president. He brought a belief in student involvement, in student government, unique residence cultures, and so a lot of what the Brotherhood is now and what it has been began when Milo Rediger took over as president of Taylor University shortly after World War II. And as we said, when Evan H. BroHo was the president in 1958, the first Samuel Morris dorm was constructed. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No, this is not, okay. Originally, on the upper campus, the first Samuel Morris dorm was what is currently the parking lot behind Swallow. And this is a picture of some strapping young Taylor students from that dorm. It was built in the late 1800s, I think, burned down in 1913, rebuilt. It was basically a wooden house. We don't know anything about what it was like there. And then in 1958, the Samuel Morris dorm, the one before the current one, was built. It was built with the Union, and as you can see, it wasn't so much built as it was inflated. It was using brand new post-World War II technology where these slabs of concrete would be elevated off the ground and then welded into place. So basically the whole thing was kind of waiting to collapse like an accordion. But thankfully that disaster was averted. And Casey, you want to talk about some of the early life on the third floor?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when it was going up, there was lots of snide remarks, like, will it stay up? Because it really was a marvel of engineering.
The best of the 20th century.
We interviewed Jay Kessler to start off our research, and one of the things he said is when they hired the contractor to tear this thing down, the guy was the most frustrated contractor he's ever seen. It took him so many tries to tear it down because it had these weird just pillars, and it was just a really kooky construction. So anyway, the dorm was nothing impressive. In fact, by all accounts, it was a piece of crap.
Especially as the years went on.
Right. It got worse.
It was very bad.
But right at the beginning, it was just these tin walls, and freezing cold sometimes really hot in the summer. We talked to Dr. William Ringenberg. I don't know if any of you have had class with him. He's awesome. He lived in Samuel Morse, not on the Brotherhood, but he remembers there was a building fire as Maria Wright Hall went up in flames, and this was right next to Sammy. And so he could feel the heat coming out of the metal walls and into Samuel Morse Hall. So that was just a really vivid picture of how awful this building was. But nevertheless, it housed a really unique dorm culture. So we're going to get to that. In the glory days, or the beginning days of the Brotherhood, it was all about intramural sports competition. So here we have some pictures of early Brotherhood members. But you have to picture in the late 60s, 1968, set the scene in your mind that residence life as we know it wasn't really a thing. There wasn't a lot of kooky, weird traditions like air band or MyGen or anything like that. Most of the students just bonded through intramural sports, especially the dudes on campus. And so intramurals was everything. Well, in 1968, they decided to have an all-campus trophy for intramural sports. That meant that everybody who entered sports would be put into a cumulative point tally, and the winner of that, the floor that won that, would be the all-sports champion. So that's just to set the stage for Taylor University here. Wilson, go ahead and tell us about Second West.
Sure. At the beginning of this all-sports trophy, Second West, or the association, as it was known at that time, was the dominant floor in intramurals. And they would pick off some of the best athletes from other floors to ensure their continued success. And finally, in spring of 1968, the men of, before it was called the Brotherhood, it was called the BAT, which was the nickname for the third floor of Samuel Morse. We didn't really find out why. But the men of the BAT decided that this had to stop. And so they decided to rename the floor the Brotherhood. They took down the old burlap sack that was hanging in the floor lobby, and a sign reading the Brotherhood. And they began to systematically plan out how they were going to dominate intramurals. And they did so with great success going into the early 70s and as the 70s went on. And it was this intramural participation that was really a big part of floor unity. It brought a lot of guys together, and that spirit of unity and inclusion and participation that was brought about through the emphasis on intramurals campus-wide and on the floor was a big part of the reason that the Brotherhood was so close-knit early on and really has been going forward.
So you got to picture that the association was this group of guys who were really exclusive. They cull the best athletes away from other floors and kind of bring them to their sadistic little mafioso monopoly. So when the heroic champions of the Brotherhood said enough, they realized that they needed to include everybody and have something radically different from the association. So for that reason, and this is historically accurate, I mean, obviously we're biased, but...
No, we're not biased at all.
Yeah, true. The guys we talked to on the floor said they called it the Brotherhood because they wanted everyone to feel like a brother on this floor. And they were going to include everybody. And whether they won or not, it was just going to be everybody does everything. So there was not a single sport that the Brotherhood did not compete in. And every single person on the Brotherhood had to do at least one sport, whether that was ping pong or football or anything. So the Brotherhood was formed. They pulled down the sack. There we go. And here we have intramural competition. Well, it didn't just stay there. It progressed onwards. sorry, real quick though, this is second Morris, which is third Morris, and obviously BroHo won. So. Here are some early Brotherhood men as they claim the A-League championship. I believe this is from the early to mid-70s. Okay, so campus life developed beyond that. The Brotherhood soon became more than just a group of dudes who liked intramural competitions, as illustrated by this picture. Wilson, explain what we're looking at.
Yes, this is probably the best example of the participation and inclusion that existed on the floor during the 1970s. This is from the 1979 yearbook, and from the 78-79 school year, there was a floor yearbook photo contest. So whatever floor or wing could produce the best photo would win and have it in the yearbook. And this is the Stewart room underneath the chapel. And so the men of the Brotherhood decided to reenact the famous painting of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And there are only, I believe, 2 people on the floor who are not pictured in this. So this is a great example of inclusion and how they banded together. And I think, as is pretty obvious, this picture won the competition. And is maybe, I think we can call it the greatest yearbook photo ever in the history of the university.
There was another story that we heard from some alumni that really, we felt, represented the unity. It involves Bob Sprunger and Doug Marlowe. And as I remember it, Bob Sprunger was an upperclassman, correct? Mm-hmm. And Doug Marlowe was an underclassman who had come on the floor. Doug was a really shy guy, didn't talk to anybody. And one day Bob looks at him and he's talking to another guy and he goes, you know what, Doug doesn't really have any friends, nobody knows him, I'm gonna go tackle him. And he does, boom, tackles him, books go flying everywhere, all scattered all over the floor. And every day when Doug would come home from class, Bob would be there and would tackle him to the ground. At 4 o'clock's coming, Bob's gonna tackle Doug. Books everywhere. Well, eventually, I mean, different day and era, right? Doug came out of his shell so much that he became a member of the Brotherhood, and his senior year did the same thing to another insecure freshman. So that was the story that we heard that we really, okay, that gives us a good impression of what it was like. Tell us about some of the other traditions.
Yes, some other traditions that existed during this time. One of them was 4 dress-up nights at the DC. It started as something called Hat Night, a way to work off some Sunday night boredom. Guys would wear crazy hats to the DC, and it evolved into actual themed dress-up nights for Medical Night, Pirate Night, Chic Night. It's a pretty memorable one where they all dressed up like oil-rich Arabs going down an 8. And so this was something that continued from probably the mid-70s to the mid-80s. And also at this time is when we have the famous Brotherhood Third West Wingett's rivalry originate.
Yep.
And it began with a guy named Tom Gross, who for some reason had a burning passion inside of him to beat Third West in intramurals. And so that is how it began, and the rivalry was mainly played out on the intramural football field, basketball court, things like that. But that is another thing from this time period that's passed down today on the Brotherhood.
2 of the most memorable pranks from this time period, the inception, from 1958 to 1979. We'll tell you about them. The first one is the Pie Assassins prank. In the mid-70s, BroHo hired themselves out as pie assassins. So if you had a friend and they needed a pie to the face, you would slip a little note to the Brotherhood and then make sure they would take care of. So one particular instance, this girl from English was having a birthday party in the dining commons surrounded by all her friends, and 2 uniformed men come up, like delivery men. And they have a big package, and it's her birthday, so everyone's like, yay! They set the package down, man, we're gonna need a signature for this, official looking form. She signs it. And they're like, great, can we get a picture with you as well? So, right when they're about to say cheese, the box pops open, out jumps a masked man with a pie, clocks her in the face, goes down back in the box, and the men try and pick it up and make a hasty getaway from the scene. So the pie assassins struck again. The celebratory atmosphere quickly turned to indignant sympathy on behalf of this girl. So the other one.
Another one from this period of time, there was used to be homecoming queen elections during homecoming week. And one year, the men of the Brotherhood decided that they would nominate this lovely gentleman right here, Mr. Roger Varlin, for Homecoming Queen. And so they ran a write-in campaign for him, and he ended up winning. And so the university, I don't believe he was officially christened Homecoming Queen. I don't think the university would have been cool with that, but he did run and successfully win the Homecoming Queen at Taylor University.
All right, so here's some fellows from Chic Night. Looking dapper. That's one thing that was passed down is the dapper good looks.
Oh, yes. Without question.
All right, so at the end of the articulation phase, we have a floor that, the inception phase. The Brotherhood has been created, and we have a floor identity based on some crazy pranks, and it started with intramurals, but everyone's feeling pretty unified. And that brings us to the end of 1979, and we move into our next phase in Brotherhood history, the articulation phase. There was an event at the end of 1979, though, that really brought the Brotherhood together, and it was more than just silly pranks. And it had to do with this guy, Jim Wheeler, for whom Jim Wheeler Memorial Stadium was named. Jim was a musician on the floor. He was well loved by everybody on campus. He was an aspiring recording artist. And in the summer of '79, right after he graduated, Jim was diagnosed with leukemia. Or he was diagnosed earlier, but he died of leukemia that summer of '79. And that really had an impact on the guys on the floor. They had a big memorial service for him in chapel. And alumni we've talked to were, to a man, the ones who were there moved by that service. Because they had just lost their friend, who had just graduated, seemingly out of the blue. Gary Dreyer, Penthouse resident, says, "I can't sing the hymn, 'It is well with my soul,' without picturing all of BroHo standing in the front left balcony in the chapel, singing that song at Jimmy's memorial in the fall of '79. So, really heavy stuff. But what that did was bring the Brotherhood together in more than just, a silly, casual way. And that was especially felt as they moved into the new decade, the 80s. So.
Yeah, the unity that created really helped to continue kind of what was already going on in the 70s. And so as we move into the 80s, we have a pretty important development in the history of the floor, and that was the creation of the Fubs. With Todd Meissner, Christy Meissner, Todd's daughters here. Today, the Fubs is a position of leadership on the floor. He will plan pranks and other activities like floor dress-up days, themed dinners, things like that. It's a pretty big deal on the Brotherhood, and it began in 1981 when Todd Meissner was on the floor, and there was a tradition on the Brotherhood at that time called the Word of the Week, and each week a new random word would be written. It probably wasn't even a word, the guys would just make them up. And so one week the word was Fubs, P-H-U-B-S, and an upperclassman turned to Todd and he said, "Hey, you look like a Fubs." And nobody really knew what that meant or what it was. It's probably not even a word, but the nickname stuck, and everyone called Todd Meissner Fubs for the rest of his time at Taylor. He said when he left, there were several people there who didn't even know his real name. They just called him Fubs. And so when he left, the title was passed down to another student by the name of Tom Merrill, and it was decided that each time a new Fubs is chosen, a B will be added to the name Fubs. And so Todd Meissner was 1B, P-H-U-B-S. Tom Merrill was 2B, P-H-U-B-B-S. And things have continued much the same, and we are currently on 8B Fubs. Next year, pretty big deal for the floor, we will choose 9B. So that is something
be prepared.
From this time. Yes.
All right, the floor kind of at this point entered into a new era of its history, and it had to do with these guys. Mizpah was the name of this group.
You can see that a common thread running through the history of the Brotherhood, as Casey alluded to, has been dashing good looks in this picture.
Yeah. So Mizpah was a group similar to Bryce Pilaf. They kind of billed themselves as a combination of Saturday Night Live and Monty Python. And so they would put on crazy skits, crazy shows and stuff, and we're really well loved, we think, by
They said they were.
They said they were. And we're just going to take their word for it. So, anyway, the Mythpot era had a lot of new developments. Wilson, share, by all means.
Yes, some interesting things that came about in this era were the floor at this time had sort of a quirky, unique, out there sense of humor. Everybody on campus liked the Brotherhood because of some of the crazy things they would do. They would do things like one day they had Muslim Day where everyone would dress up like Muslims and walk around, and every time the bell tower rang, they had to pray. So completely
We're not endorsing this.
No,
Merely reporting.
incorrect things like that. One time, this group played a slideshow in front of Wingett's advertising the Brotherhood for open house. This was the era of when you go to a college, instead of showing you a video, they just show you a slideshow with pictures. Like, look at all the fun activities people do on our campus, and there'd be somebody hanging out with their friends or a basketball game or something. And the Brotherhood made one for the floor and played in front of Wingett's, showing all the interesting men and their various exploits. And they played it continuously for about 3 hours, just on a loop on a bed sheet.
It was called The Brotherhood and You.
Yes.
Great. They're trying to
Very, very well done.
Yeah. We actually have the video file if anyone,
Mhm.
I mean, maybe we can show that afterwards. It's like
Yeah.
10 minutes long. So.
And an interesting part of that was after the video, which is about 7 minutes, they had the Stars and Stripes Forever play in its entirety. So you have a 7-minute video, and then the screen's on the end, and there's a song playing for 7 minutes at the end of the video. So that was an interesting thing. Also, during this time, a new member of what is the current Brotherhood Triumvirate, the Fubs, Pope, and the Snake, was added. You want to tell us, Casey, about the beginnings of the Snake?
Indeed, yeah. The Snake, as we know him today, is very well beloved. And he represents one of the most quiet people on the floor who the Brotherhood tried to bring into the spotlight forcibly, whether he wants to be in the spotlight or not, and make a big deal out of him and celebrate him. How it started, you're going to have to help me on the exact date, but it was a man named John Kissinger. And do you know the year?
I think it was 88.
88.
Yeah.
There was a guy named John Kissinger, and nobody really saw much of John. People basically knew he was on the golf team and
Watched TV a lot.
watched a lot of TV.
And that was all he did.
That was John for you.
Mhm.
Well, one day he's walking back from class, and a group of 3 friends who called themselves the Metal Bards, that was their nickname, because they loved metal and had musical abilities. They were also known for just giving people nicknames that started with S. So they'd be, what up, Snanky? Or, hey, Smarty. Just to name a few. And they see John coming up, and they're like, look, there goes the Snake. And John was kind of lanky and awkward and not very snake-like. But the name stuck. Everyone called him the Snake. He's referred to in the yearbook as Snake Kissinger. But it's unlikely that he ever really knew what the hullabaloo was about because he didn't really talk to anyone. That nickname did get passed down, but that's how that one started. There was another member of the famous Brotherhood Triumvirate, and that is the Pope. Tell us about
in the early 90s, there's a DC discipleship coordinator, what's now a DA on the floor, named Peter Marshall. And this was a man who came from, he was adopted into a Messianic Jewish family. And while he was a tailor, he developed an infatuation with the Catholic Church. So people started calling him the Jewish Pope when he was there. And the nickname stuck. And after he graduated, and the Snake, to another person. And so the nickname began to be passed down. And so the Pope has taken on sort of a spiritual leadership role on the floor. I don't know. Just kind of a position of prominence on the floor. And the ironic thing in the story is that Peter Marshall is now a Catholic priest. So you never know where you go from Taylor.
Yeah. He was also the editor of the '94 yearbook, which was chock full of BroHo stuff. He really, gave him a scratch on the back there. So anyway, we've jumped a little bit ahead. The Triumvirate, as we know it, didn't exist until the mid-'90s. So when these guys were around, it was just the Fubs, and that's the Mizpah era. Well, right after the Fubs got transferred on to the 3rd B, we had a bit of a dilemma, a bit of a crisis of designation, so to speak. We have on the left Tim Grable, the anti-Fubs, and we have on the right Mark Shannon, the ex-Fubs. And so what happened around 3B, and this threw off our reckoning for a long time. It took us so long to figure out what had happened. But apparently Tim Grable was given the third B because he was annoying. And they wanted to really just, kind of help shape his character away from that. It didn't work. Needless to say, it didn't work, and in fact, he just got more annoying. So, there we go. I hope he doesn't watch this. So they stripped his B away from him, and he fancied himself thereafter the anti-Fubs. And they gave it to this guy, Mark Shannon, who was much quieter, and we interviewed him. He's a great guy. But he had to leave the floor because of academic reasons, and so they stripped his B away from him as well, and he became the ex-Fubs, which he ended up enjoying the title just as much probably as he would have the actual Fubs title. So, anyway.
And into this power vacuum on the floor as it were in the early 90s, a savior strode in to save the title of Fubs from sort of the damage that these two men, I really hope they don't watch this, that these two men have done to the office. And that savior, in all of his molded glory, is shown here as Jason the final 3B Fubs. And from what we figured out, this man is most likely responsible for helping the Fubs become the position of power that it is today. When we spoke to him, he mentioned that he was strangely proud of the way he executed the office, and he's seen here supervising a rock, paper, scissors tournament that was held between the Brotherhood and Sammy too. But he's a very important member.
Regal. He almost just looks regal.
I know.
He was part of the reason we called this phase the articulation phase, is because now all of a sudden BroHo is like, yeah, we're BroHo, we have this history. They call themselves a tradition in the yearbook. So it's, BroHo as we know it. It's getting much more similar to how we see it now. So anyway, Jason Fortner, he was a beast. He still is a beast. All right, let's talk about Senator Morris. There's not a new slide for that. Anyway, Senator Morris was a combination of Sammy 2 and the Brotherhood. They would do a lot of things together. They would interact. And I don't know if you've noticed this on campus, but Sammy 2 and BroHo are thick as thieves. We got each other's backs. That started in the early 90s with this thing called Senator Morris. They had a full-fledged inset about it in the yearbook. And so Senator Morris, they would just do massive rock, paper, scissors tournaments, cheer for each other at intramurals. And they also had this thing called Tribunal, which they would try the sins of those who had trespassed against Senator Morris. This is a good picture of the triumvirate. Here we have Jason Fortner, 3B. In the middle is Peter Marshall, and on the left, that's one of the snakes. We don't know who he is. In keeping with the tradition of the snake. All right, a couple of unique pranks include the Night of the Crickets and the Unsister Floor. Wilson?
I'll talk about the Unsister Floor.
Please do.
This was Second North English, and I believe was it 1998? 98 was the Sister Floor of the Brotherhood. And they transgressed the sacred pact that they had made when they became the Sister Floor, and went to Taco Bell with Third West Wingates, the sworn enemy of everyone on the Brotherhood. And so, as you can imagine, when the elders of the floor found out about this, they were outraged and decided to label them the Unsister Floor. And in order to earn back the title of Sister Floor, the women of Second North English had to present the floor with 3 holy relics on or before the Ides of October, November, and December. And they performed quite incredibly. They managed to procure one of the IDs, Taylor IDs for Peter Marshall was one of them. And each relic had to be presented with a very sincere letter of apology, which they all wrote. And it was really demonstrate their remorse and just shocked that they could have transgressed so deeply. But one of them was Peter Marshall's ID card. Another one was a sketch of the original Sammy statues that are outside of this building, drawn by the artist. And we didn't ever find out what the third one was.
They rewrote the lyrics to a song or something.
Yeah,
we're not sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
And they did retain the title of Sister Floor. They got it back, but not after much suffering.
Anyway, so the other night of infamy in the Brotherhood's history at this time was the Night of the Crickets. And you might have heard references to this prank because it shook the pillars of Taylor. We heard this from Tommy Klein, class of '97. So what happened was some Swallow Robin guys had seen the war going on between Wingett's and Sandy, and they wanted in. They wanted some action. So two of their heroes grabbed bags of crickets. They bought these crickets, and they were going to go release them in Sammy 2 late at night. So they sneak over, but not before they've contacted a member of Sammy 2 as their inside man who was going to open the doors and let him in. Well, needless to say, he sold them out big time. And so Sammy 2 calls their allies upstairs, the Brotherhood, and they all come downstairs and hide in the wings, or the doors, the little closets on either side of the hall. And Samuel Morris Hall, just picture a big, long box. They called it the Cracker Box. And so the two Swallow Robin gentlemen enter the hall. They're in the middle of the hall when somebody gives the signal, which is, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And out from the sides pour probably 40 or 50 guys and surround them. They're handcuffed together, led into the bathroom, and a line is formed where each person in line throws a handful of flour and splashes some rotten milk somebody had on those. So these guys are just caked with flour and stinking milk, and they're led back to Swallow Robin. This is after midnight, and Swallow Robin is awake at this point, just waiting to see that, their hero's triumphant return. And instead they get an angry mob bringing these back. But the best part was that the Swallow guys had left the bags of crickets on Sammy 2. So, needless to say, those ended up on 3rd West Wingett's that very night. Tommy told us years later, in the Echo or some publication, an alumni of Wingett's was asked what was one of the most memorable nights at Taylor. And he said somebody put tons of crickets in our hall, and we never found out who did it. So there we go, it's the Brotherhood. We're owning up to that with pride. So that was the Night of the Crickets, 1997. Well, at this time, Samuel Morse Hall, bless its old creaky heart, was starting to deteriorate. Oh, we have some more slides first, though. Sorry. Sorry about that. Wilson, do you want to read this?
Sure. This is from the '94 yearbook.
Yeah.
I believe poem about Senator Morse. Flushing stalls, shower calls, fumbles filling up the halls, patty squirrels, joking girl, ultimate out by the girl, water guns, bell runs, homework sometimes getting done, snowball fighting, Elvis sightings, fire at the reservoir lighting, wet cement, the big event, rock, paper, scissors tournament. And then these are some nicknames. Skippy, Spiffy, Timmy the Good, Roth and Ken, Snake and Wood, Pretty Boy and Malibu, Solomon and Beely too, Barney and Lurs, Still Watching Friends, Crafty, Sloppy, Trump and Penn, Doorway Lurker, the John and Chad, Adam, Tex, Schmuck and Brad, Toddy, Bastion, Snoop, JC, Olaf, Inbred, and the Clergy. Friends will be back again, Mitch Buchanan and his Baywatch friends, the Thugs and Animaniacs, the Pope suffering a heart attack, Dan's hair always looking cute, the Malaysian is good too, Ford, Ego, Taz and George, Phil and Bill, Donnie and Cord, Giorgio Hoffman, Stone and Hill. We've been through court and other thrills. We've skipped the loop and picketed, formed Senator Morris, and the Thugs was made it. All in all, the year's been good, on our floor known as the Brotherhood.
While you're at it, tell us about this picture.
Yes, this was a full picture one year, and these are actually individual people on top of the Union. It was 1998, and they were able, somehow, the authorities at Taylor allowed them all to climb up on the Union, stump BroHo with their bodies, and the Fubs and a pilot friend they knew flew over the Union and took an aerial picture of them on top of it. And this ended up in the yearbook. If the yearbook signing, or the Declaration of Independence signing picture is the greatest yearbook photo of all time, I think it's safe to say that this is number 1A.
Yeah. But the thing is, we didn't know what this was until we found a document from Fubs saying, hey, surprisingly, we'd be from the perspective of where Sammy is now.
Yeah.
So anyway, the hall had been re-bricked, it's true, at some point in its history, but it was also really starting to deteriorate. And right as it's demolished, it leads us into the third phase of the Brotherhood, the continuation. Okay, so here's some pictures of them demolishing the hall. By the time it got torn down, though, it was a blast. I honestly kind of wish I could have lived right at the bitter end of the second Samuel Morse building because, I mean, tell us some.
Well, as you can see, they let a lot of things slide as far as artwork in the old dorm. The 4B Fubs, there's a lot of paint a mural in his room on the wall. Two guys knocked down a wall in a closet separating two rooms, and so they were able to make a little suite. So, I mean, you can kind of just do whatever you want because the building was going to be torn down at the end of the year. Also, a tradition that began probably in the 80s where people would carve their names into the lobby ceiling was allowed to continue. So, not much concern for the building itself around this time because, I mean, there were cracks in the floor where you could see all the way down where the floor and the wall met. It was just a lovable piece of garbage.
Yeah. The water system was interesting. All through its history, every time someone would flush a toilet, all of the showers would simultaneously get scalding hot. And so it had a system, you guys well know. That's awesome. I didn't actually know you had that. So it's sweet. I enjoyed it. People will be telling stories about it someday. So, yeah, but they would yell, shower! And everyone would get out of the stream. Later, it seems they could feel the water pressure increase and just intuitively just know, using the force. We'll talk later. So there you go. It was finally demolished. This was a huge, big deal for people. In '98, it was brought down. Alumni came out of the woodworks to say goodbye to this building that for 40 years had housed guys from BroHo. You know, every 4 years a new group would come in. And they all had memories of living in this building. So the slide on the left is them tearing down the old Sammy. The one on the right, I think, is them building the new Samuel Morse Hall, which in this picture is standing right next to the old one. There was a really cool moment where they were both standing. Yeah. So the continuation started off with a big debate over what the new Samuel Morse Hall was going to be. You want to elaborate?
Sure. There was talk of, as you can see, as you know, the new Sammy has three separate sections, unlike the old one, which is a long hallway. So a lot of alumni of Sammy floors, including the Brotherhood, were very concerned about the effects that would have on the culture of the floor. Would it still be one floor, or would it be Brotherhood North, South, Center? And so the floor traditions were preserved, and it did continue to be a floor, but that was probably a source of anxiety for some alumni. Also, in the early 90s, when the new Sammy was still in kind of the dream stage, there was talk of making the new Sammy and English both co-ed dorms. And so, I know, it's almost an abomination to think about. And there's a whole stack of letters in the university archives of people writing to Taylor saying, do not do this, alumni, and everything. And so, thankfully, it wasn't done, and a lot of the fears of the alumni group ground as the floor continued into the continuation phase with a head of steam and lots of traditions that were in existence in the old Sammy.
The alumni did stop it from becoming a co-ed dorm, but they were unable to get customized urinal plaques commemorating the old Sammy Morse. They were pushing for everybody's name who had lived in the old Sammy to be on a urinal as like a commemorative gift. The administration wasn't going for that.
Something about conferences and people saying that.
Right around this time, a new tradition appeared, and it involves the jackets we are wearing.
Yes.
These are the BroHo jackets purchased in, what, 97?
Late 90s, yeah.
By the Fubs, right?
I don't know.
No, we don't know.
Maybe.
Okay.
Something about the jackets.
Anyway, so here's a picture of BroHo with Jay Kessler. Yeah, what a dude. He's such a bro. All right. Yeah, so much of the fears of how would the Brotherhood change, they kind of were groundless. The Brotherhood continued on, and it was just as crazy and awesome as it was beforehand. Some new traditions arose, such as Wingett's Appreciation Day, which you may know about, where we just appreciate our brethren over in Wingett's.
Oh, yes. Invitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Indeed. The boxer run became a thing. It originally started as a penthouse tradition, where they would just run out in their boxers and run around Sammy and run back in. When BroHo got their hands on that and it became an all Sammy thing, we eventually started running right through Wingett's. Just to, further appreciate them, really.
Yes.
So, right. There were also some negative advances in floor culture, which Wilson will.
Yeah, around probably the late 90s into the early 2000s, there was a slight shift in floor attitude, and obviously this wasn't true of everyone, probably not even the majority of people, but the Brotherhood started to move away from kind of this quirky, out there, fun-loving floor that everyone on campus liked, as it had been in the late 80s into most of the 90s, to kind of an extreme, just weird floor. They do things like spray paint, basically vandalize RUP when it was being built. There was some pretty bad blows exchanged between the Brotherhood and Third West Wingett's at this time, and just a lot of stuff that was probably not good for Taylor students or Christians in general. And this is especially seen in what we're going to get to later, which is the Brotherhood Court. It took on a much more intense nature and was probably not very constructive enough building up. Also at this time there was sort of a anti-women attitude. There'd always been kind of a joking anti-women sentiment on the floor, but it became a lot more extreme at this time, so much so that early on in 4B Folks' reign, he had to have a sit down with some older guys on the floor because he'd been hanging out with some girls, and that was not acceptable, I guess, on the Brotherhood. And so throughout the 2000s, there was this attitude, and then in 2008 with 7B Fubs, Levi Stuckey, he tried to change a lot of the things, the floor's reputation. He received a lot of pushback, but we think he did a very good job and made some changes that needed to be made.
It wasn't like a big tangible shift, but from our research right around this time, it went from more entertainers to more we're just extreme and we do extreme crazy things. And so that was kind of a dip that I think we recovered from pretty well, but we're trying to figure out why that was. We have a couple theories. First of all, there were more guys on the Brotherhood. And those guys were attracted to BroHo, not necessarily because they loved BroHo, but because it was a new dorm. So we're not entirely sure. That's one working theory we have. Either way, there were great guys on BroHo. There were some guys who were troublemakers on BroHo. But anyway, right around 2008, like Wilson said, the Fubs really tried to turn things around, and there was kind of an awareness that maybe they pushed things a little too far. So they bounced back. The pendulum always swings back and forth a little bit. And that'll lead us right up until the present day. First, though, here's some good-looking men in their matching floor jackets, yearbook. So here we are in the present day, Wingett's Appreciation Day, 2008. All of a sudden, color pictures were invented in 2008. No, most of our pictures are scans from yearbooks, so that's why they're black and white. But anyway, so there you have it. Let's talk now about some themes of our research.
Yeah.
First of all, there they are, the Brotherhood. Oh, they're so beautiful.
Oh, I can't do it.
So here's some themes.
First one that we saw was unity. There's always been this spirit of unity and inclusion that we talked about originating in the late 60s. Obviously, there's going to be some ebbs and flows because there's high turnover of guys at the college dorm, but it's always been a hallmark of the floor. Secondly, traditions have been a big part of the floor. We were able to observe how some of them come into existence gradually, how some begin suddenly, and how some go out of existence. And lastly, there's this theme of isolation. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Sammy and Swallow are kind of all by themselves on the north end of campus. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, the Union used to be the dining commons until the DC was built in, I believe, 1972. And starting in about 1965 with the construction of Wingett's and Olson on the south side, there was this shift of building dormitories and the DC on the south side of campus. So basically the social nerve center of campus was moved to the south side with Sammy and Swallow all by themselves on the north side. And that, we believe, played a big part in the unique culture of the floor because, I mean, they have to create their own culture because there's really no one else around them. And in harsh Indiana winters like we're experiencing now, it's not much fun to go all the way over to the south side.
So all in all, we found the history of a floor that was based on inclusivity and unity, developed some crazy antics, which were just tons of fun to learn about. But we really kind of discovered what it means to be a part of BroHo, and it's much more than we thought it was going to be. All right, well, in our flyer, you might have seen a reference to chords. We are now prepared to do something no one has ever done before. We are going to reveal to you the secrets behind.
Hey, what are you guys doing?
What?